Yada, yada, yada. Zoom, 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 zoom. The jockeying by the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith and the Canadian oil and gas industry, which is, of course, headquartered in Alberta, is intensifying. The Prime Minister Mark Carney released the projects of national interest last week. There were five of them. There was an LNG project on the West Coast, but there was no pipeline and no expansion of the oil sands. And so what happened on Monday is that a very large group of oil and gas CEOs signed a letter, sent it off to the Prime Minister demanding action. And here's the problem with this. Uh, this is the third letter they've sent. They sent one in the spring to the political leaders during the campaign. Then they sent another one, the amended one after that. And now they have this one. And they haven't said anything new. There's absolutely nothing new in here. All the old demands. And back in March, uh, Smith sent a letter to then Prime Minister Trudeau, and she had 9 demands that must be implemented in 6 months. And, that was March 20th. Here we are, September 17th, 3 days till the deadline is up. So they're putting the pressure on. They're turning up the screws, and because they want something quicker, they want some firm signals. Now, I want to show you what they're asking for because this is kind of instructive. You can, if you, okay, so here, number one, simplify regulation. So they want, the uh, uh, Environmental Impact Assessment Act simplified. They want the tanker ban off the northwest coast of BC changed. They have a whole bunch of regulatory changes they want thrown out or watered down quite a bit. Number two, commit to firm deadlines for project approvals. And you can see, that makes some sense because they've had projects, where they put 10, 12 years into it and then it got canceled or they had to cancel it. And it's a lot of money and a lot of effort and for nothing. Number three, pay attention. This is the key one, grow production. Now, we'll get to that one in a minute at greater detail. The fourth is attract investment, and the fifth is incent Indigenous co-investment opportunities. This is kind of odd because the federal government has already promised that it would add money to Aboriginal investment pools that it's got available, and the Alberta government has got money available. So this one, I don't know what, maybe it's not enough. Maybe I don't. This does make a whole lot of sense. It's and this government has said Indigenous communities need to be at the table. They need to be investors. They need to. It's part of economic reconciliation. So that seems a little over the top. But what I really want to talk about is production. So first of all, lest you think that somehow Alberta has been hard done by Ottawa over the last 25 years, look at this graph. I mean, essentially, in 2000, there were, roughly 2 million barrels a day of production, and now there's over 4 million barrels a day of production. I mean, there's been 125% increase, maybe 150% increase. I mean, that's hardly being stifled. And during that time, of course, almost all of the growth came from the oil sands. So, it's not like the industry has been poorly treated from this point of view. But here's the big but. The industry and the government, and I hasten to add, Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson, are all of the view that there is going to be significant growth in global oil and gas demand out to 2050. Now, how do I know that? Well, first of all, as Smith has talked about it publicly many times, I asked her some questions at a press conference one time, and she made it very clear that she believes in the OPEC, view of the energy future with 20 million or 25 million barrels a day of new oil demand coming on stream. So Smith is on board. The CEOs are on board. They've said many times they, basically share the same worldview as Smith when it comes to oil and gas demand. Tim Hodgson's on board, and I know that because I've been corresponding with his department, and they very kindly explained to me which scenarios the department and the minister are consulting when they, think ahead to projects of national interest and policy and so on. And they are mostly focused on the most optimistic ones. That would be OPEC. That would be the STEPS scenario from the International Energy Agency, and so on. So all three of these groups they're oil and gas bulls, not bears, bulls. They believe in that rapid growth is coming at the global level, driven by demand growth in Asia. They still think there's going to be growth in China, despite the fact that it looks like it's peaked and it's not coming back, on and on. So that's what's driving them. They want to get after this as quickly as they can. So there was another, we can sort of understand the letter, but there was another very curious thing in there. And this was in earlier letters, drafts of the letter. They say that they want the industrial emitters carbon tax, which is TIER, T-I-E-R, in Alberta. They want it eliminated. Now, this is very curious to me because I reported extensively when the carbon tax was introduced in not introduced, was expanded. The announcement came in 2015 in Rachel Notley's Climate Leadership Plan. She had 4 oil and gas CEOs behind her on the stage. Why? Because they had been holding secret meetings with 5 environmental groups, and they had a handshake deal to support carbon taxing. When the government then very, sort of appreciated the support. It was going in the plan anyway, but this was a big endorsement of it. Fast forward 10 years, now they want it gone because they say it's not globally competitive. But here's the problem. There's 2 problems. One is, for a while now, the carbon market, because you can, those who are really efficient can gain credits, and those who are too emissions intense can buy credits, and so there's a carbon market. The carbon market has been oversupplied with credits. And so instead of the $95 a megaton, which is the headline price, the actual market price is about $25. Now, you'll remember back in 2007 when Ed Stelmach brought in ESCR, which was the first industrial emitters carbon tax, and it was set at $20 a ton. And I think economists I've talked to agree $20 did nothing. It essentially was, such a small cost to the producers that it didn't affect any change. So how much is $25 going to be? Not much. So they're not paying very much to begin with, yet they still want it gone. And in addition to that, on Tuesday, the day after this letter was sent, Smith introduced changes to TIER that, according to Pembina Institute and other analysts, have basically weakens TIER. So first of all, the carbon market is not very well managed, and it's got an oversupply of credits. Now the government's going to make regulatory changes to weaken it even further. Yet at the same time, it was Smith that a couple months ago, proposed to Carney at a meeting a grand bargain. We will lower emissions in the oil and gas industry if you give us a pipeline. Now, they're going to have to do it anyway. But this was the deal. And the problem with that is that now there are only a couple of ways to do this. One is with either the carbon tax, which is there, the emissions cap, which is a cap and trade layered on top of the carbon tax. So the speculation is that Carney will get rid of the cap and trade and make the TIER, the carbon tax, stricter. Well, you could do that, but if on the other, remember, these are programs that are administered by the province. If the province is tinkering around and making changes to weaken them, the net effect, who knows? But it looks like they would probably be weaker. And they're already weak because of the oversupply. You get where I'm going with this. And on the one hand, Smith is trying to do a deal with Carney, this grand bargain. And on the other hand, she's kind of, on the side of her desk, she's doing things that undermine her negotiating position with the Prime Minister. This is a very odd way to go about negotiations, but, that seems to be Smith's Smith style. But here's the problem, and this is where I think they're going with this, is the back, 2, 3 years ago, Pathways Alliance, all the oil sands companies that got together, they had a plan for carbon capture and storage they were going to decarbonize most of the oil sands. And then there was also a plan to decarbonize conventional production. And all together, it would cost $75 billion, of which $50 billion would be paid by governments. Yes. And some of it already has. The federal government under Trudeau brought in an investment tax credit to support oil sands, CCS, and the federal government's already committed $8 billion. The Alberta government's committed $2 billion under their own program. And that only takes care of 10 or 12%, maybe 15% at most of the emissions. What are you going to do about the other 85%? Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and predict that what the industry really wants is for government to pay 100% of all the CCS costs. And I'll tell you why. I was just reading today about a study that looks at 668 mega projects around the world. CCS projects always run way over budget and way over schedule. So if that project is going to be was estimated earlier at $50 billion by the Pathways Alliance, and it is now going to face cost overruns. We've seen, what did the Trans Mountain expansion go up by 6 or 700%? Even if it doubled, what the industry is trying to do, I think, is palm all of its emissions reduction obligations off onto the federal government to get them to pay it. And it'll argue that, well, you get a lot of tax revenue from our activities, so it'll pay for itself in the long run. It's the way they always make these kind of arguments. There's lots of moving parts here, folks. I could be wrong, but my argument is consistent with the way this industry conducts itself. It always tries to minimize its obligations. It will try to get out of, funding its liabilities, and often does. $300 billion of unfunded liabilities in Alberta alone. It will always try to so it wants to reduce its regulatory burden, wants to reduce its cost burden, and it will always try to offload those onto the taxpayer wherever it can. And one reason why is because investors, more than half of whom don't live in Canada, investors are demanding more and more money back. They want them in the form of higher dividends and more share buybacks because oil and gas is under pressure. And so so every nickel that they can squeeze out of their system by not paying a carbon tax, by having the government pay for CCS, means more money they can give back to their investors, the more they can keep their stock price elevated, which gives the CEO a nice big bonus. Not a small motivation here. And that's where we're going here. And the bottom line is, this is going to be bad for taxpayers. If it plays out like I think it will, it's going to be bad for federal taxpayers. It's going to be bad for Alberta taxpayers, and it's going to be a mess. So we'll keep you updated as this little melodrama continues. But I would say at this point, it's kind of looking, my guess is that Carney's going to have to make some concessions in order to get the industry to do anything. And we'll have to see what those are.